Ms. Suh, I have just probably a couple more quick questions for you, and then I believe we've got yet another vote coming up at 11. And this relates to a policy issue that for us in Alaska is pretty important. Some would say all-consuming, and that's the issue of ANWR. The Fish and Wildlife Service's draft conservation plan and EIS for ANWR did not include a development alternative for oil and gas in the coastal plain, and the department stated in testimony previously that the reason they did this was because that development requires an act of Congress. But the draft plan included alternatives for additional wilderness and wild and scenic rivers. Those require an act of Congress. So on the one hand, they're saying, well, we can't do an alternate plan for development because that would require an act of Congress. And yet, they also turn around and say, well, wilderness, scenic rivers, which requires an act of Congress, but it's okay, we're going to put this in the plan. I think it's very inconsistent, highly inconsistent. So the general broader question to you is whether or not you believe the 1002 area of the coastal plain, which was set aside for oil and gas development in ANWR as part of this compromise reached under ANILCA, whether or not you believe that it should be developed.
Senator Murkowski, the President has made it clear that he does not believe that development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is warranted at this time. The Secretary of Interior, Sally Jewell, agrees with the President, and I agree with both the Secretary and the President. That is not to say that the balance of energy needs and the energy opportunities in the North Slope of Alaska are unimportant to this administration or to the Department of Interior. And again, in all of the above energy strategy, I think we are working very concertedly, and I know that you've been working very closely with my colleague, Mr. Boudreau, on opportunities to expand the opportunity for responsible energy development in both onshore and offshore in Alaska.
Well, and I didn't really anticipate that you were going to tell me that you supported development in ANWR. It would have been a great surprise this morning, but that was not what I expected. But you have mentioned in your response to me previously that you look forward to understanding and learning more about the federal laws that have such impact on us in Alaska, ANCSA, and ANILCA. ANILCA specifically provides that there will be no more wilderness designations within the state of Alaska. How do you reconcile this proposal then coming out of Fish and Wildlife for additional wilderness and wild and scenic rivers when ANILCA has specifically stated no more? When those designations were made several decades ago, it was recognized that the amount of wilderness that we have in Alaska, which is more than the entire wilderness in the rest of the country, that basically Alaska had contributed. And yet this administration is continuing to push on this in direct violation and contradiction to what ANILCA spells out. How do you reconcile the terms of ANILCA with this latest effort coming out of Fish and Wildlife?
Thank you, Senator. First, again, thank you for forwarding the speech that you gave on Alaska Day in 2011 and the background that provided of the kind of origins of, intents of both primarily ANILCA were quite helpful to me. My understanding is that the Fish and Wildlife Service has a variety of different alternatives. There is not a preferred alternative. I recognize your concern associated with wilderness, but I also recognize that wilderness, wherever it's designated, is an act of Congress and will require an act of Congress, and to that we are ultimately and always deferential to this body.
Do you expect, or do you know when the final plan is expected to be released?
I am not aware of the time frame.
One of the real concerns from folks back home is that despite the statements coming from the administration that local residents should be involved in the land management decisions, Secretary Jewell has articulated this as well, but it seems that that only happens to favor conservation, unfortunately, not production. In Alaska, there's a clear majority of folks, including every statewide elected official, both Republican and Democrat, that strongly support responsible oil and gas administration. The concern back home is that the administration is going to unilaterally act on ANWR. Would you support such unilateral action without, again, the involvement of the people that live and work and raise their families there?
Again, I believe every public process that we have around important policy decisions requires and demands the need for strong public engagements, particularly for engagement of the local communities and local stakeholders. As I stated earlier, I don't believe the department has the authority to unilaterally decide anything on wilderness. That is an authority that, again, rests within this body that we will ultimately and always be deferential to.